Lead poisoning causes permanent brain damage, slows learning, makes kids violent, slows growth, causes hearing loss, causes difficult pregnancy, can hurt the fetus, can make you sterile. Lead poisoning robs our future.
I've called it the invisible monster that's devouring our children right before our very eyes.
The most difficult thing about lead is that you can't see it, and so that's what makes it more scary.
And she's been acting out, so I'm looking like maybe, got something to do with lead.
Why are these mothers worried about their children and lead poisoning? And why is it called the invisible monster? Because lead poisoning means permanent brain damage, and many of the victims are toddlers.
Childhood lead poisoning is children that are exposed to lead. Somehow that gets into their mouths through their fingers and the toys, on pacifiers and food, but it gets into their mouth and absorbed into the body and rises up to a level that's enough to cause physiological harm to kids' bodies. And there's a whole lot of different ways that lead can cause harm to kids. It can affect their bloodstream, blood vessels, blood supply, so that they actually get anemic. It can affect their hearing, can affect their kidney function, and can predispose to high blood pressure in the future of those kids' lives when they grow up.
And lead is a neurotoxin.
When kids get exposed to it enough and long enough, it actually affects the development of kids' brains.
Dr. Kennedy says a blood lead level of 45 becomes a medical emergency, but most kids are poisoned slowly. A blood lead level of 10 is damaging.
At lower levels, it doesn't cause, visible effects. The trouble is it causes subtle but serious long-term effects.
The long-term effects of lead poisoning becomes apparent when children begin school.
Well, it impacts what we're trying to do because we're trying to educate kids, and it creates and presents a tremendous barrier.
For example, children losing short-term memory. You teach something to a child goes to lunch, and then you review the same information with the child in the early afternoon, and the child will give you a blank look.
Jennifer Sanfilippo and Natasha Travis had different experiences, but the same scare, dealing with their children and lead. Jennifer's harrowing brush with lead poisoning began several years ago with her eldest son, Giacomo.
Giacomo was a year old. He had just turned a year, and my husband was painting the exterior of the house himself.
Giacomo, like most toddlers, was very oral. Everything went into his mouth.
Giacomo came out on the porch one day and actually bit the porch and ate it. I said to my husband, "Do you think that there's lead in any of this paint?" And my husband said, "Well, probably. The house was built in 1920.
Lead wasn't banned from paint in the United States until 1978. Jennifer called the Monroe County Department of Health.
I called them and they said all I needed to do at the time was send a chip about the size of a quarter and they would test it for me.
A couple of days later, the health department told Jennifer the chip tested high for lead and to have Giacomo tested.
So they took a venous blood draw, and within 24 hours the health department and my pediatrician called me to tell me that his blood lead level was over 20.
Experts say a blood lead level of just 10 is a matter of serious concern. Jennifer was told to clean her house from top to bottom. She and her husband hired a crew to finish the painting.
They weren't to do any sand blasting or water blasting. It had to be all hand scraped, tarps on the ground, everything cleaned up afterward. We did what we needed to do when we needed to do it, and we were fortunate. I don't know what would have happened if we hadn't caught it.
The quick response of Jennifer and her husband Jim saved their son, who's now healthy, from a terrible future.
Fortunately, he didn't need direct medical intervention. However, I did have to have him tested. I think it was the third month and the 6th month, every 6 months, then every year up until he was age 5.
Natasha is still dealing with lead poisoning and her young children's health. According to some pediatricians, birth to 6 years old is a critical time for brain development. This is also the time when children are actively exploring their world and most susceptible to lead poisoning. Lead poisoning is not just a city problem. It can happen in the suburbs. In fact, most rural and suburban children are lead poisoned because of unsafe work practices during home remodeling. Remember, if your child's blood lead level is high, it's important to stay in touch with your doctor. An open line of communications with your doctor will help ensure your child receives the proper care. Be sure to let your doctor know if you notice any changes in your child.
After the lead levels came back high, Nyaja's was 23 and Keith's was 14. So the health department came over afterwards, is that right?
Natasha believes her children were lead poisoned in a house she used to rent.
It was like real bad, like far as like lead paint chips in the windowsills, just the wood was like real old.
But lead was found in the house Natasha is currently living in as well.
The county came in and did their inspection, and there were hazards that they found, and the landlord has corrected those hazards, and then they've cleared the house afterwards.
Dr. Kennedy's task is to bring the kids' blood lead levels down.
I like to recheck them every month until they get down to a safe level, and then we can lengthen out the intervals of checks. So hopefully the kids will get their blood levels done today, and they'll be good and down, and then the next step is to make sure that they stay down.
The next step today is blood tests for Nyaja and Keith.
By New York state law, all physicians taking care of kids are supposed to check their lead levels at 12 months of age and 24 months of age.
Dr. Kennedy says you should have your home tested for lead as well.
If you're living in a housing that you're concerned about, you probably should start testing even earlier than the requirement, starting at 6 months, 9 months, or 12 months of age.
If you're pregnant, protect your unborn baby from lead. And it's very important to bring your new baby home to a lead-safe house.
My advice to a homeowner and to a renter is to make sure that your home is clean, that your children are washing their hands frequently, that you're washing their hands for them when they're babies, and that any free paint, anything that's questionable, make sure it's painted, covered, and contained.
There's another important element to protecting your child against lead poisoning. It can be found in your garden, kitchen, or grocery store. Judith Van Ness knows. She's been teaching mothers about nutrition for decades.
Well, lead is absorbed in the body in the absence of adequate calcium and iron. It takes the place of the calcium that would otherwise be in the child's diet, or perhaps there isn't enough of it. And calcium and iron both help prevent lead from being absorbed by the body.
Judith says products such as milk, buttermilk, and even powdered milk in foods are a great source of calcium.
Greens are especially good. Turnips, dandelion greens, and we've got Swiss chard, collard greens, kale, mustard greens, parsley you don't eat a lot of, but dried beans are a good source.
Iron is another great food source to offset the possibility of lead affecting your child's body. Remember, childhood lead poisoning is preventable. There are things you can do to protect your child.
There's no need to panic, just be careful.
Get their children tested at 2 and 1 as soon as possible. Don't put it off for any reasons, because that's something really serious,
There are many resources available to help you protect your child against lead poisoning.